Ladies and gentlemen, respected listeners and seekers of truth, today I wish to bring to light a concern that is both subtle and profound, a reality most people feel but very few truly address. The question before us is, why are spiritually awake people quietly disappearing from society? To understand this, we must first recognize who these people are. Spiritually awake individuals are not those who merely follow religious practices or memorize scriptures. They are the ones who live with heightened awareness, who see beyond illusions, who value truth more than trends, and who cultivate compassion above competition. Their presence brings calmness, their words carry depth, and their silence speaks volumes. Yet, despite their importance, they are slowly retreating from the noise of the world. One reason lies in the nature of modern society. We live in an age of distraction, where people are consumed by constant notifications, endless comparisons, and the rush for material success. In such a world, those who speak about stillness, simplicity, or inner peace are often ridiculed or dismissed as impractical. Spiritually awake people do not thrive on chaos. They thrive on silence, reflection, and authenticity. So when society grows too loud, they quietly withdraw. Another reason is the growing shallowness of human interactions. Today, conversations often revolve around possessions, positions, and appearances rather than meaning, growth, or truth. Spiritually awake people feel alienated in such environments. They find it exhausting to explain the importance of humility in a world obsessed with self-promotion, or to speak of unity in a society divided by ego. When they realize their voices fall on deaf ears, they choose to preserve their energy rather than waste it. There is also the burden of misinterpretation. Many spiritually awake individuals are mistaken for being strange, aloof, or even antisocial. People fail to understand that their silence is not weakness but wisdom, that their detachment is not indifference but clarity. Tired of defending their authenticity against shallow judgments, they fade into the background not out of fear, but out of deep acceptance that not everyone is ready for their truth. Furthermore, spiritually awake people sense the imbalance of values in today's world. Where once wisdom was honored, now wealth is worshipped. Where once integrity was admired, now influence is celebrated. They see how society glorifies speed over stillness, noise over silence, and image over essence. And because they refuse to compromise their principles, they no longer fit into the mainstream flow. Rather than bend to falsehood, they disappear into solitude. But we must not mistake their disappearance as a sign of defeat. In reality, many spiritually awake people retreat not to escape society but to heal, to recharge, and to work silently on higher vibrations. They may not stand in the spotlight, but they radiate energy in the unseen. They may not lead movements, but their quiet example plants seeds of change in those who are observant enough to notice. Like hidden rivers nourishing the roots of trees, their presence sustains more than we realize. So, what does this mean for us? It means that we, as a society, must ask ourselves, are we creating space for such people? Are we honoring their silence, respecting their wisdom, and learning from their example? Or are we pushing them away by drowning them in noise, judgment, and shallowness? If we continue to neglect their role, society risks losing its balance, for spiritually awake people are the torchbearers of light in times of darkness. In conclusion, spiritually awake people are not truly disappearing. They are simply stepping back, watching, waiting, and preserving their flame until the world is ready to listen again. They are the quiet guardians of truth, the silent healers of our collective wounds, and the invisible architects of a more conscious future. Perhaps it is time we stop overlooking them and start seeking them, not to change them but to let their wisdom change us. Here are 7 keynotes for the speech, Why Spiritually Awake People Are Quietly Disappearing from Society. Spiritually awake people see beyond illusions and value truth over trends. Modern society's noise, distraction, and materialism drive them into retreat. Shallow and surface-level interactions leave them feeling alienated. Their silence and detachment are often misinterpreted as weakness or strangeness. Society glorifies wealth, speed, and image over wisdom, stillness, and essence. They withdraw not in defeat but to preserve energy and nurture higher awareness. Their quiet presence continues to guide and sustain humanity, even from the background. Spiritually awake people are those who live beyond the surface of life. They are not content with chasing external achievements alone. Instead, they are seekers of deeper truth, wisdom, and understanding. To them, life is not simply about accumulating wealth, titles, or possessions, but about uncovering the essence of existence, the reasons behind suffering, and the path toward peace. They are often described as individuals who see beyond illusions, because they have come to realize that so much of what society glorifies is temporary, hollow, or deceptive. In a world where appearance often matters more than authenticity, their perception becomes both a gift and a challenge. They recognize that trends, fashions, and worldly competitions are fleeting, while truth, love, and consciousness remain eternal. When spiritually awake individuals look at society, they notice patterns that most people overlook. They see how people constantly compare themselves with others, chasing validation through status symbols, careers, or social approval. They see the endless race for recognition and the desire to fit into molds that were created by external pressures. To them, these illusions are nothing more than distractions from the deeper journey of the soul. For instance, while many find pride in showcasing material possessions, spiritually awake people recognize that true self-worth cannot be bought. They understand that one can have everything on the outside and still feel empty inside. It is this awareness that sets them apart, and it is also why they feel alienated in a world that runs in the opposite direction. What makes their position even more challenging is the fact that truth is rarely popular. Speaking about selflessness in a culture that glorifies self-promotion often draws resistance. Pointing out the emptiness behind excessive materialism may be perceived as arrogance or bitterness. When they talk about slowing down, reflecting, and living authentically, they are often told that such ideas are unrealistic in a competitive world. Thus, they learn to choose silence over confrontation, observation over argument, and detachment over endless explanations. It is not because they do not care, but because they realize that forcing truth upon unwilling ears is a waste of energy. Their wisdom allows them to understand that everyone awakens in their own time, and forcing awareness only leads to conflict. Valuing truth over trends also means that spiritually awake people do not fit neatly into societal categories. They do not dress to impress or chase the latest fashions. They are not swayed by fleeting movements or peer pressure. Instead, they align themselves with timeless principles: compassion, humility, honesty, and inner peace. In doing so, they sometimes appear different, or even out of place in environments where everyone else seems to follow the crowd. This difference, however, is the very mark of their authenticity. They refuse to conform to illusions because they know that illusions, no matter how beautiful they appear, will eventually collapse. At the same time, their perspective gives them a profound sense of freedom. By valuing truth, they free themselves from the endless cycle of comparison, envy, and competition. By rejecting illusions, they step outside the artificial race that society imposes. They live with a sense of calmness, as their self-worth is not tied to external approval. Yet, this very freedom also isolates them because it makes them harder to understand for those who are still immersed in illusions. This is why many spiritually awake people retreat quietly, not because they dislike others, but because their vision makes it difficult to connect with those who cannot yet see. Ultimately, the spiritually awake person's decision to value truth over trends is not just a personal choice, it is an act of courage. It requires the strength to resist the pull of conformity, the wisdom to recognize the deeper essence of life, and the patience to stand apart without resentment. They know that living authentically will cost them acceptance in mainstream society, but they accept that price willingly. For them, the greatest tragedy is not to be misunderstood but to live a life disconnected from truth. Their journey is not about being seen, admired, or celebrated. It is about being real, present, and aligned with something greater than worldly illusions. Modern society has become a place of constant noise, distraction, and relentless pursuit of material gain. From the moment people wake up, they are bombarded with notifications, advertisements, and demands that pull their attention in 100 directions. Rarely is there a moment of silence, and rarely do people pause to reflect on the deeper meaning of life. In this environment, spiritually awake people often feel overwhelmed because their nature thrives on calmness, stillness, and clarity. They seek inner peace, yet the world around them is increasingly designed to keep everyone restless. This clash between their inner needs and the external chaos becomes one of the primary reasons why they quietly withdraw from society. Distraction is one of the strongest forces of the modern age. With technology constantly demanding attention, people have become accustomed to living in a state of mental scattering. Social media creates endless comparisons, television and entertainment offer escape instead of reflection, and consumer culture promotes the idea that happiness can be bought. Spiritually awake people, however, see through this illusion. They understand that constant distraction only distances individuals from their true selves. To them, silence and mindfulness are essential for growth, yet these values are undervalued or even dismissed in a fast-paced world. Instead of trying to compete with the noise, they choose to step back into spaces of quiet where they can nurture their awareness without interference. Materialism is another powerful factor that drives them away. This isolation is not just about preference but about energetic impact. Spiritually awake people are sensitive to the energy of conversations and environments. When surrounded by superficial talk, criticism, or negativity, they feel their inner peace being disturbed. They sense the heaviness of judgment, competition, and ego, and it weighs on them far more than it does on others. While many can tolerate or even thrive in such spaces, the spiritually awake feel a need to protect their minds and hearts. As a result, they begin to limit their interactions, seeking fewer but more meaningful connections rather than many shallow ones. It is important to note that their withdrawal is not arrogance. They do not believe themselves to be superior to others. Rather, they simply realize that engaging in surface-level exchanges does not nourish them. They crave interactions where they can share wisdom, exchange genuine emotions, and explore the deeper aspects of life. In the absence of this, they choose silence over pretense. This choice is not always easy, because humans are social beings who desire connection, but for the spiritually awake, the quality of connection matters far more than quantity. At times, this withdrawal can make them appear aloof or distant. Friends or colleagues may misinterpret their behavior as disinterest, but in reality, it is a form of self-preservation. They would rather spend time alone in reflection, meditation, or communion with nature than sit in a circle of meaningless chatter. They find more comfort in solitude than in a crowd that doesn't understand them. This shift may cause their social presence to diminish, but it is the price they willingly pay to preserve their authenticity and inner clarity. In truth, the spiritually awake do not disappear from society out of rejection. They disappear because the space for deep, honest, and soulful connection has become so rare. When society chooses small talk over wisdom, entertainment over truth, and appearances over authenticity, the spiritually awake quietly retreat to where they can breathe, think, and feel freely. They do not hate the world. They simply refuse to let shallow interactions drain the very essence that makes them who they are. In a way, their silence becomes a mirror, reflecting back to society what is missing: depth, truth, and the courage to go beyond the surface. One of the most painful experiences spiritually awake people face is being misunderstood. Their silence, which is born from wisdom, is often mistaken for weakness. Their detachment, which stems from clarity, is frequently misinterpreted as coldness or indifference. In a society that values constant talking, showing off, and being visible, their preference for stillness and simplicity becomes unusual. People often cannot comprehend that silence can hold more power than noise, or that stepping back from worldly pursuits can be a sign of strength rather than failure. As a result, spiritually awake individuals find themselves judged unfairly, labeled as strange, and sometimes even excluded. This repeated misinterpretation wears them down, and instead of constantly explaining themselves, they choose to disappear quietly into spaces where they no longer have to justify who they are. For many spiritually awake people, silence is not an absence of thought or feeling but a deliberate practice of conserving energy. They understand that words carry power, and that speaking without purpose only adds to the noise of the world. So they speak less, but when they do, their words are meaningful. Yet in environments where endless chatter is the norm, their silence is seen as awkwardness, arrogance, or inability to contribute. People may question why they do not join in gossip or small talk, assuming it reflects weakness or social discomfort. In truth, it reflects wisdom. They know when to remain quiet because silence can heal, teach, and reveal far more than empty words. The same is true for their detachment. Spiritually awake individuals often practice detachment not because they do not care, but because they care too deeply. They understand that clinging to people, possessions, or outcomes creates suffering, so they release attachment to maintain peace. However, to those who do not share this perspective, detachment looks like indifference. A friend may mistake their calm reaction in a crisis as lack of empathy, when in reality, it is their clarity that allows them to remain steady. A colleague may think they are unambitious because they do not obsess over promotions, when in reality, they have chosen fulfillment over competition. This inability of society to see the depth behind their choices often leaves them feeling invisible and misunderstood. Over time, the effort to explain themselves becomes exhausting. Spiritually awake people realize that no matter how carefully they clarify, many will only interpret from their own limited perspective. They come to accept that misunderstanding is inevitable when speaking a language of awareness in a world that often values appearances more than substance. Instead of constantly trying to correct the misconceptions, they choose to step back and let their lives speak for themselves. Their actions, serenity, and integrity become their silent response to the judgments of others. This decision to retreat is not born from bitterness but from wisdom. They understand that energy is precious, and defending themselves against misunderstanding drains them unnecessarily. They would rather conserve that energy for growth, reflection, or service to those who are ready to understand. In this way, their disappearance from the mainstream is not a rejection of others but an act of self-preservation and inner alignment. They know that trying to prove themselves to a world that misjudges them only leads to frustration. So they stop trying, and in that quiet step back they find freedom. What many fail to realize is that these individuals are not weak but incredibly strong. It takes courage to remain silent when provoked, strength to remain detached in a world of attachment, and wisdom to choose solitude over shallow acceptance. But because society is conditioned to equate visibility with power and attachment with love, their choices are misunderstood. The irony is that their quiet withdrawal is itself a form of teaching, a silent lesson about the strength of authenticity and the power of inner clarity. Ultimately, spiritually awake people are not disappearing because they lack the ability to engage. They are disappearing because society too often misinterprets their essence. When silence is seen as weakness and detachment as coldness, it becomes easier for them to step away than to fight endless battles of misunderstanding. Their retreat is a statement that true strength does not need recognition, and that wisdom often chooses to remain unseen. They may vanish from the crowd, but in doing so, they preserve the very qualities that make them valuable to the world, qualities that will one day be recognized when society becomes ready to understand. Society today is shaped by values that often run opposite to the path of spiritual awakening. Instead of honoring wisdom, society glorifies wealth. Instead of admiring integrity, it celebrates influence. Instead of embracing stillness and presence, it rewards speed, productivity, and constant activity. Spiritually awake people who live by principles of truth, peace, and authenticity find it increasingly difficult to exist in a culture that places more importance on what can be displayed rather than what can be lived. This growing imbalance in values forces them to step away, not because they reject life, but because they cannot thrive in an environment where image matters more than essence. Wealth has become the primary measure of success. A person's worth is often judged by the size of their house, the luxury of their car, or the status of their career. The spiritually awake, however, see the emptiness behind such measurements. They know that money can provide comfort but not fulfillment, and that possessions can be lost in an instant. They see how society's obsession with wealth traps people in endless cycles of desire and anxiety, leaving little room for reflection or peace. For them, true richness comes from contentment, compassion, and inner freedom. But when they express this perspective, they are often dismissed as naive or unrealistic. The constant glorification of wealth over wisdom creates a divide, pushing them to the margins where they can live their values without compromise. Speed is another value that dominates the modern world. Productivity is equated with importance, and people are praised for being busy rather than being balanced. Spiritually awake individuals, however, understand that life's deepest truths are not found in rushing but in pausing. They value moments of silence, reflection, and presence. They believe that stillness is not wasted time but the foundation of clarity. Yet, in a culture that idolizes constant motion, their pace appears too slow, their priorities too strange. People often misunderstand their preference for simplicity as a lack of ambition, when in truth, it is a conscious rejection of the rat race. Because they refuse to worship speed, they are seen as out of step with modern life, which makes their quiet withdrawal inevitable. Image has also taken precedence over essence. In an age of social media, people are more focused on how things look than on what they truly are. Success is measured in likes, followers, and appearances rather than genuine connection or authenticity. Spiritually awake people, who live for truth rather than show, find this exhausting. They cannot bring themselves to play the game of constant self-promotion because it feels false. They value being real more than being admired. But in a society that thrives on spectacle, their authenticity goes unnoticed, or worse, it is misinterpreted as insignificance. Their refusal to polish an image means they do not fit the mold of what is celebrated, and so they fade quietly into the background. This imbalance of values does not merely frustrate spiritually awake people, it disheartens them. They look at a world where wisdom is ignored, where shallow fame is preferred over deep knowledge, where honesty is often punished while manipulation is rewarded. They recognize that trying to fight against such currents on a large scale is futile, because society moves according to its collective consciousness. Rather than wasting their energy trying to convince others, they choose to live quietly in alignment with their own values. Their retreat is not defeat but a refusal to compromise. It is a choice to remain true to themselves in a world that constantly pressures them to be someone else. In truth, their disappearance is a reflection of society's own choices.